This is Scott the Fix-It Guy. Our goal with our videos is to empower you to be able to do the repairs on your own and save a whole lot of money and also get that great feeling of having fixed it by yourself. Today we have a really common problem of the Frigidaire dryer making a terrible screeching noise as we use it. You can hear it kind of coming from the back area, and that's where there's a part called the rear bearing right here, and it wears out over time, usually maybe 4 or 5 years into use, and pretty easy to replace it. You can just do it yourself. This video shows how to do it. Here's the rear bearing. We'll put a link in the video description below. Here's the part number, and these things are pretty cheap. You can get them at Amazon, and it's a pretty cool kit. It's made by Frigidaire. It comes with this part, the rear bearing, this plastic, or the lubricant, high temperature lubricant plastic cup that the bearing goes into. It's kind of like a ball that sits into this thing. And then it has a little hardware thing here that has screws and a metal plate, and then also a little ball bearing. The ball bearing touching the back of the rear bearing can make that screeching noise to kind of tell us that it's time to replace it. I've seen people not replace them and keep using them, and eventually the plastic cup just deteriorates and the whole drum drops, so don't want to do that. So you can also reach in and turn it, and you may end up hearing that screeching sound too. Sometimes it takes a while for the screech to kick in, has to kind of warm up, but it's definitely a terrible frequency of noise. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. So I got it unplugged, and now I'm going to go for the replacement of the bearing. I'm just making sure that I turned off the power, and I'm going to lift it up a little bit and put my case underneath to get the dryer up a few inches. That's going to let me get to a couple of screws underneath. They're holding on this front panel, but we got to get the front panel off. So there's a little black screw here. We're going to zip that one out, and there's one on the other corner. We'll do the same thing. And then we got to get to some other screws at the top of the front panel, and to do that we have to remove the top panel. It's all pretty easy to do though. When it comes out, this will take you about half an hour to 45 minutes. You'll be done. It also allows you to clean the inside of the dryer, which is nice. I removed that case, taking off 2 Phillips head screws on the back of the front panel. The back of the top panel. And once I get those off, I can slide the top panel away from me by just a few inches, and that's going to then allow me to lift the top panel off. I have to remove these 2 modular connectors on the right hand side. Got those off. I'm going to clip this little zip tie because these wires are part of the front panel, and I got to remove the front panel. Zip ties there just to keep those wires from rubbing against the drum during operation. So we got some screws here in the front that we have to remove, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. Once those are off, we'll be able to remove the front panel. Actually, I forgot there's 2 more screws we have to take off too that are located on the inside of the cabinet on the right and left hand side. That one and that one, the little black screws. Zip those out. If your dryer is stacked on top of a washing machine, you can still do all this without removing the dryer. You just need to stand on a stool or a ladder to get you up a little bit higher so you can get to these screws, but you don't have to take the dryer off. I'm using a standard head screwdriver to kind of pry the front panel away from the frame because the clips are friction design, so you have to pry them away. I'm also going to lift up here on this part of the front panel to help get it to move off of the frame. If you don't do this with a screwdriver, you probably wouldn't have the strength to be able to just pull the panel free unless you really, really use a lot of effort. But the screwdriver helps to just get it to start moving. So I'm going to put it on the edge here and just pry those two apart. And now I can take the front panel off. Once that's off, it's going to be easy to get to a lot of these parts. This is kind of stuck, so I'm just using my knife to cut the foam free. I think the glue was so wet when it got put on at the factory that it kind of glued itself. Okay, here's some lint. I can get rid of that while I'm here. So the lint that builds up inside the blower wheel, that's really good to get rid of because it limits the airflow and also it makes kind of a weird sound during operation. So any lint that you see in there, you can just get rid of it because it is somewhat of a fire hazard and it's normal for there to be some buildup inside the cabinet. So I'm going to undo the belt now by grabbing the idler wheel and pushing it to my left, and then go to my left, and I'm going to pull the belt off of the little wheel, which is the motor pulley. So once that's off, I'm going to remove this one little screw here in the middle, which is kind of like a guide that keeps the drum from going forward too far during operation. So I got to get that thing off. And then I have to lift up really hard in the back to lift the back of the drum up by about 1.5 inches to get that ball part of it out of the plastic cup. And sometimes it's in there pretty good because it's kind of worn itself into a groove. So you have to use some force to lift that up. Once that's loose, you can use the belt to help you to get the whole drum out of the frame. And that's going to allow us to easily get to this thing in the back, which is the rear bearing. Luckily, again, we only have to do this maybe every 5-6 years. So we're using the socket now to pull the two screws out that are holding on the rear bearing cup, the support for the rear bearing. If you notice in the back though, there's a little piece of metal that these screws go into right there. If you have a stacked one that you can't just grab these parts easily, what I do is I put tape over that part we just saw that fell. I put any kind of tape will work, but I usually use like the foil tape to hold that into position so that I can use that same metal piece again later to hold the screw in. You can see the deterioration of that cup. So I'm just going to clean that area a little bit. The way I do this on a stack one is I'll reach around behind and put the tape on that little metal piece before I remove that cup assembly, just to keep that little piece of metal in position. So I've got the lubricant thing now. I'm going to take the cap off and then use the other side of the cap to pierce the foil, and then I can push a bunch of that lubricant, high temp lubricant, into the plastic cup. This stuff over time just wears out or evaporates, and then you have the metal touching the plastic without a lubricant, and then the plastic starts to wear away, and then the metal starts to touch the little BB or bearing that's there to limit static buildup, and then you get that really bad sound. So I'm going to put that little BB on the back, and the grease is actually going to hold that BB into position while I do this assembly. Put on this metal brace. This all comes with the kit, and I'll feed in 2 of the new screws. You can use the old screws too, but it gives you new ones. And now I'll put this whole assembly into position. You can kind of see how it works here. There's holes for it, and there's a little slot that the metal piece goes into right there. And I'll put those 2 screws through. This little metal piece comes with it. I'm going to put that in the back. That's why it's good to have it taped, because on a stacked unit you can't easily put your other hand in position to put these screws into this metal piece. So if it's taped there, it's pretty cool, because then you can just put the screws right into it. You don't have to hold it. So I'm starting those screws by hand, and now I'll tighten them up with my socket, my driver. So that's good. That's all ready to go. We also have to replace that metal thing, this ball thing, which is the actual rear bearing. We have to put a new one on the back of the drum. I'm just wiping off the old lubricant that it kind of got pushed out of the cup. This is interesting. We're taking the new screws and we're putting them into the new rear bearing, and we're using our screwdriver to drive them in. You got to use a fair amount of force. And you're cutting threads into the rear bearing. If you don't do this, it's really hard to get those screws started. So we're doing this even before we try and put the rear bearing on. There's 3 holes, 3 screws. You can use the same screw to thread put the new threads in the three holes on the rear bearing. So you just zip them in, zip them out, and then go to the next one. Okay, now I'm going to use my screwdriver to undo the 3 old screws that are holding on the old rear bearing. I like to use this really long extension for my Phillips head screwdriver so that I can do this all by myself. Otherwise, you may need another set of hands to help you to put on the rear bearing. So I got 1 screw in there. I'm going to put the new rear bearing over, line it up, and then I can kind of see what I'm doing. I'll use my screw gun to tighten that. Just get one of them tight. That's going to make it really easy to put on the other 2. So I'm going to move it around, line up the hole. I'll feed in the next one by hand to start it. And then I'll use the screw gun to tighten it up. Sorry about the camera angle. So I just use these video glasses, and sometimes I can't tell what the camera's seeing. Here's the 3rd one. And because I cut those threads in already into the rear bearing, this makes it a lot easier. Zip those in. So now I'm just making sure all 3 of those screws are really tight. Okay, I'm going to put the drum back in. Use the belt to kind of help me guide it in. I'm going to lift this ball piece above the socket, and then I'll drop it in. You should feel it drop in, and you should be able to spin the drum and it'll pivot around that ball. So I'm lining up the belt, and I'll reach in with my left and right hand, and with my right hand, on my left hand, I'll pull the idler wheel to my left, and I'll use my right hand to get it over the little wheel on the motor. Now before I put it together, this is on the front panel. I'm just pulling all this crud out of the filter housing. There's a lot of lint that built up over the years, and that really obstructs. Look how much that is. That's crazy. It really obstructs the airflow. It makes the dryer work way harder. So dryers are all about airflow, so you want to get rid of any lint in there and clean it up best you can. Mainly it's just inside this area though. And I'll lift out the filter. I'll clean it while I'm there. Also notice this filter was not sitting down all the way flat inside of its filter housing, so I'm going to use something to clean the ledge that it sits on. I'm using my fingers and a little screwdriver to clean all these little holes, because this is where that moist air flows through to leave your dryer to help your clothes dry really fast. If these are obstructed, you're losing, we probably had 15 to 20% obstruction of airflow, which basically is 15 to 20% less efficiency. Means your dryer has to run a lot longer to dry the clothes. So that sits nice and flat now, that's good. Okay, to put the front panel back in, going to get it into position. We got to get the drum to lift up. We have to lift it up to get it onto this front felt bearing, the front bearing, while we're pushing in the front panel. You have to kind of lift the front panel up, and that's also lifting the drum up. And then there's these little clips. You have to see where they are here on the sides, and they fit into holes that are in the cabinet, and you have to line them up and then push in, and they'll click. There's one of those clips. You have to push in really good. I usually have to lift up with my screwdriver again on the metal piece here at the top as I'm pushing in to get the front part of our top part of this front panel to get in far enough to line it up. I'm going to put that black screw back in, just start it by hand, and then I'll use the screwdriver to get it tight. There we go. And we do the same thing on the other side. Sometimes it's hard to line the screws back up. The holes back up before putting in the screw. If you have something pointy, like a really small Phillips head screwdriver or an owl, you can use that to help you kind of line up those holes again before attempting to put the screw back in. So you just want to start it by hand, and then you can use the screwdriver to get it tight. So I'm just making sure this right side front panel, everything's lining up, and I'm going to push in really hard, give it a couple smacks to get that in tight enough. Okay, I got that screw back in. Looks good. I got the top screws back in. I'm going to put my little case underneath the dryer because I want to put in those bottom ones. I put those two electrical connectors back together on the front right-hand side. That's important. And now I'm putting in the screws on the top also to hold on the top panel. Already put in the screws on the bottom of the front panel too. And that was it. That worked really good and got rid of that terrible noise. Thanks so much for watching our video. We really appreciate your support. And when you get a chance, please press the subscribe button below so you can be subscribed, and also the notification bell so we can send you more videos about appliance repair. Please also give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. If you really liked the video and it really helped you, please press this new applaud button and you can show your support and also get a nice clapping hands for your video. Thanks again.